Chapter 7.
Well, did you find out anything out there at the cache?
Sam opened up huffily. Who, me? Returned Pat vaguely. Oh, not much, Sam. Nothing worth wasting your time with. What do you got to report?
Not a dang thing, and well, you know it,
Snorted Sloane sourly.
I stood around on one foot all afternoon watching the Mexican dogs hunt for fleas.
They were paused before the corral where they had met after Stephen's return from Apache Cache. They turned inside the saloon and had their drink and looked the bar over. Castle Gate was unusually quiet tonight. Any hint of tension existed here seemed to have faded into thin air.
Did you see Moon?
Sam inquired, lowering his voice. Pat nodded. He's got a fine layout there in the canyons, but his M-bar herd has been allowed to run pretty thin. He sure didn't show any great willingness to open up and talk.
Get what you was after?
Sam drove straight to the point with his usual candor. Why, Moon's gone into some kind of cattle deal with Marble. I got that much, Pat admitted. We may learn more about it at the Plum Bob. While not departing from the strict truth in what little he said, he had no wish to reveal his discovery in Axe Head Canyon before the logical moment. It might well be that the fate of several men lay in his hands, and under such circumstances Pat had learned not to make mistakes.
We going back to the hotel for tonight?
Inquired Sloane, shoving his glass away. Pat hesitated. Tell you what, he proposed. Let's pull out for now. We can bed down in the brush and be that much closer to Plum Bob in the morning. Sam looked at him pensively.
You still got the notion somebody may be keeping an eye on us here in town?
He challenged. For a moment, Pat gave a little sign to that he'd heard. I only know I hadn't forgotten what happened to you. Does that make any difference? Sam pushed away from the bar, rejecting the forlorn hope of prying anything out of this coolly self-possessed man.
All right, let's drift,
Sam growled. Getting up their horses, they left town quietly, deciding to leave the pack animal behind for the present. Although they were in no haste, they took the trail west in the direction of Marble's headquarter ranch. The moon would rise late, they knew, but the blazing stars cast sufficient dim light over the ghostly brush to show their way. A coyote yipped in the darkness, and a sleepy owl hooted. An hour later they were staking out the horses in a likely spot. It was a warm night, and no attempt was made to bother about a fire. Hey, Sam. Pat paused in the act of rolling into his blanket. Remember that bald-headed hombre we saw there in town? Sported kind of a gray derby hat. Looked like a clerk or something.
Yeah, kind of gray-faced, you mean? Yeah, I know. Who is he?
Well, he's Marble's business agent. Gurley is the name. He said to me as I was leaving town this afternoon. Pat delayed for effect. Did he say anything to you after I was gone by any chance?
No, why should he?
Oh, no reason. I was just asking. If you should happen to see him talking to Clay Marble, though, at any time at all, I want you to tell me, Pat went on steadily. It was so unusual a request that Sloane rose up on an elbow to stare across at his companion for a moment in wonderment. No more was forthcoming, however, and he sank back in silence. Before long, the even breathing of the pair announced that both were asleep. The first faint lighting on the eastern horizon aroused Pat in the morning. Rising to stretch and stamp into his boots, he turned to find Sam sitting up in his blankets. Pretty fair morning, Pat muttered, scanning the paling stars. A faint rosy light was beginning to steal across the shadowy sage, and the air held a zestful tang.
You and your camping out in the brush,
Sloane snorted in his customary early morning ill humor.
Now we gotta fog it clear to Plum Bob before we eat.
It can't be that far, Pat countered. Plum Bob's cows are leaving the bedding ground all around here, and there's a spot of cottonwoods over yonder. Marble's place should be about there. They saddled up hastily and set off at a brisk pace, and as Pat had expected, they found the famous Plum Bob headquarter ranch house sprawling in the shade of the gnarled cottonwood grove. It was a huge place, constructed of thick adobe blocks and laid out entirely on one floor, a low wooden porch extending nearly all the way around. Adobe walled bunk shacks, cookhouses, sheds, and barns clustered thickly about the rear, giving the place almost the look of a sizable village. Horses stamped and snorted in many of the corrals stretched away from there, a forest of pole fences. Pat and Sam saw dark colored Mexicans moving about the littered yard at a variety of chores. Belated punchers were driving in to what must be the eating hall, while others emerged picking their teeth and rolling cigarettes.
Well, let's get in on that,
Sam grunted. No one spoke as they tethered their mounts and hastily washed up at the bench provided for the purpose and stepped inside to find seats at the table. Stowed Mexican helpers carried in steaming mugs of coffee and slid plates before them, generously heaping with food. Glancing about at all the other men, all silently occupied, they recognized no one. Done eating, they stepped into the yard, and hearing an angry roar, looked up. Doc Marble stood beside a ranch rig which had drawn up, a single man in the sagging spring seat. He looked like a small rancher, just now shaken with anger, his reddened face contorted with the violence of his emotion.
I tell you, you're driving me out. Don't tell me you ain't intended. There's Plum Bob steers scattered all over the crick till my own cows can't find a blade of grass. My God, Marble, you're a big man. You can't even need my 2x4 range. Can't you understand?
Tears of nervous rage stood in his eyes.
I'm being starved off my land, although carelessly, if that's what you're saying is true.
An ancient, bitter grievance, Marble did not appear to find it strange. Well, Slater, I'll speak to my manager about it. He nodded with great coolness.
Speak to him? Hell, I've already been spoken. Slater was scarlet. Damn it, Marble, Bill Block has already waved a gun at my boys for running a pound or two off your stock.
I'll speak to him, Doc repeated, with a singularly mild regret. If you should change your mind and decide to sell, have a talk with Ed Gurley. He handles such things. For an instant Slater appeared about to go for his gun, and then, in helpless fury, he whipped up his team and bowled out of the yard. Old Doc looked about him speculatively for a moment and turned. He spied Pat and came forward in a direct attack. Well, Stevens, hope you've altered your decision about taking that job with me. Obvious sincerity rendered his tone gruff. Push, Marble, you don't need another ranch manager. Pat appeared to laugh the matter off. Hadn't thought of it. Call it keeping the peace, came the hopeful reply, somewhat urgent. So Clay's still bothering you, is he? Pat glanced about at Marble fleetingly. Is it still riding herd on him that you have in mind? Doc kicked a stone doggedly, his heavy glance downcast. I ain't forgetting he's my own son, Stevens. His stubborn hide is worth money to me and more. Pat faced him straight forward. Well, if that's our understanding, Marble, I'll play along with you, he said. I want it agreed, though, that there's no strings on the course I might choose to take. There's no guarantee, either, of how much I'll be able to manage. I'll undertake to see that Clay don't go getting the short end when the chips are down, and I'll do what I can to turn 'em in your direction. You'll have to be satisfied with that much. Doc thrust out a big hand, his relief apparently genuine.
Cut your own swath, Stevens, and I'll try and take her as the going gets tough, he rejoined huskily. What do you mean by that now?
Sam grumbled suspiciously when Doc left them for a few minutes.
The old coot sure can put on an act when he tries.
Pat's smile was dry. You heard what we said to each other, was his only comment. Dinner time came, and both Pat and Sam were beginning to wonder about Ezra and Clay. It was just possible that Bill Block might have some word of them. They saw the plumb bob ramrod ride in, confer briefly with Marble, not without throwing a sour glance in their own direction. Doc joined them a second later, ready to accompany them to dinner, only to turn back once more in the last minute.
Visitors coming,
he grunted, with a wave towards a group of men riding into the ranch in a jaunty fashion.
Go ahead in. I'll be right along.
The pair stepped into the big dining room, found their places, and politely fell to. Eating with relish, the food here being uncommonly good, Pat was absorbed in his own thoughts, till Sam's elbow nudged him guardedly. Glancing up, his eyes ran over the 5 laughing young horsemen in the act of entering. His momentary stillness at sight of one of them was the equivalent of a violent start. Pat's pupils slinted. Nothing could have offered a more graphic demonstration of Plum Bob's famed hospitality than the sight which met his eyes now. This, his incredulous mind told him, was the infamous 7 Rivers Gang, bold and brash to a man, yet not one of them a match for their laughing, wolf-jawed leader named Murderer. Murderer was not too harsh a name for a man who had accounted for more than a dozen victims. Yet he looked a boy. The newcomers found places for themselves together in the upper end of the table, while old Doc, having entered behind them, laughing deep in his chest at their quips, returned to his old seat directly across from Pat. "Still serving steaks, Marble?" one of them called down the board jestingly. "Not plumb bob beef, I trust?"
"Well, I have cautioned the boys about beefing steers carelessly," Doc chuckled back. "Speaking generally, mavericks seem to be the tenderest eating."
"Well, when you run short, you just let us know," another savage with a flashing, audacious grin. "We ain't so particular."
"I'll do that, Bonnie. And let me know when you're honing for fresh beef. Will you do that?"
Marble jibed easily. It was Pat's first plain glimpse of William Bonney, notorious throughout the Southwest as Billy the Kid, a well-known figure in more than one range war, and just now he was a freelance at the head of this loose-knit, reckless band, said to ride with a long rope and a ready gun, and certainly he looked the part. A slim, light-haired young fella, not yet 20, he was not particularly attractive, a slight tendency to have buck teeth marring his otherwise regular features. There was nothing boyish about the Kool-Aid derisive eyes, pale almost to colorlessness, with which he constantly was raking about every man in the room, though somehow they failed to create an impression of undue suspicion. And like his fellows, Billy Bonney appeared cockily sure of himself, his good spirits irresemblable. His repute was, however, that few offered to take any liberties with him even in jest. With the marked exception of Marble, no one here took any notice of either Bonney or his disreputable cronies. They did not care, basking in the limelight of dubious glory. The meal over, Bill Block led his crew off to work. Billy the Kid and his followers did not suffer the comparative quiet which ensued to become heavy. Full of fun, they practiced marksmanship in the beaten ranch yard, gawping hilariously when a Mexican cook burst forth, sputtering his rage over an accidental punctured cooking pot. Old Doc joined in their mirth, while admonishing them indulgently to take greater care with their aim. That reckless shooting had endangered life as well seemed to occupy none of them at all. Shoulders propped against a nearby wall, Pat and Sam watched the fun with a faintly crinkled eye. If Booney found occasion once to wander close and turn suddenly for a boring look directly into Pat's face, neither bothered to acknowledge instant beyond a slightly amused smile Stevens gave the young fellow. From the moment of his arrival, Pat surmised shrewdly that Booney had come here with some definite purpose in mind. With several indictments hanging over his head, the outlaw cowboy was notoriously in the habit of making his long, fast rides strictly for business reasons. Doubtless Doc Marble understood this thoroughly. Under their light-hearted jovialty there was a cobra quality in one of the 7 riders' crowd that made them dangerous as long as they remained within gunshot, and Doc was taking no unnecessary chances. From the manner in which Booney laid a narrow attention on every slightest movement about the ranch, Pat judged he either awaited the appearance of someone or hoped to learn some obscure fact which interested him. Was it for Clay that he was watching so vigilantly? The range detective was directly responsible for the death of one of his gang. What place more logical to look for one at his father's ranch? That the outlaw leader was already credited with secret dealings involving old Doc in the matter of the 7-hook steers could only be calculated further to arouse Bill Bonney's treacherous vindication. Meanwhile, the long riders, presently tired of wasting lead, broncs racing followed, and the Mexican stable hands doing their best to stride scrub horses, but old Doc could not be persuaded to bring out his best animals, regardless of provocation. He may or may not have suspected a trick which would leave him minus the horses, visibly respecting Marble's prudence, even when it derided it. Booney took the refusal in good part. The idea of pulling away appeared to strike him suddenly, and he and his friends swept astride with reckless agility of endless practice, and, straightening gracefully into the hall, they swooped out of the yard like hawks, venting their shrill yells. Pat watched them sail away over the dun range, free as the wind, and then turn as the sharp clatter of hoofs coming from another direction. Clay Marble and Ezra rode up and hauled in to sit staring after the departing outlaws. "Who is that, Bill Bonney?" Clay asked sharply, whirling to glower at his father. "They pulled away in an awful hurry. Wouldn't be because they saw us coming, would it?" It was so, of course. Pat, smiling, saw recognition of the fact struggle into old Doc's leathery face. "They stopped by for dinner. Would you have me turn 'em away?" Clay didn't intend to let him off so easily, however. "Are you covering for them damned owl hoots?" he snapped back bitterly. "You always was too all-fired friendly with 'em, and by God I'm beginning to believe that now there may have been some dealings between you." He drew in a deep breath. "You know why I'm here on this range, and you gave orders to have me tossed off your camps." It did indeed put an ugly face on the facts, said in just that way. Managing somehow to control himself, Doc voiced a hasty denial. "I told you to go ahead with your crazy snooping and forget it," he rumbled argumentatively. "I don't bother my head over what's happening out there on the range till something goes wrong. Bill Block, he runs them camps, and you know it." "He's right enough there, Clay," Pat interjected quietly. "I overheard Block telling your dad what he intended to do only this morning. You wouldn't find your steers on Plum Bob Range anyway," he added in calm assurance. "I happen to know." Old Doc stared at him in slow wonder, and Clay arrested with equal promptness, his attention effectively diverted. "You know a lot, then," he whipped out. "Suppose you spill it?" Pat's head shake was definite and final. "Strikes me there's already been too much loose talk about here, but if you'll stand ready to come along with me, I'll show you," he offered with lazy confidence. Clay was more than ready. "Well, what are we waiting for? Get on your horse, Steve, and let's get after it." They pulled out a moment later. Sam and Ezra silently accompanied them, and old Doc could not resist a parting shot. "What's this all about?" he roared after them. "I warned you I wouldn't have any rough stuff on this range, Stevens. Don't forget what you said." He choked out. He dared not go on. End of chapter 7.